Please welcome Marita Fabrikant. She's here from the Belarusian State University. She's focused on intercultural, cultural and ethnic sociology and interdisciplinary studies in nation and nationalism. She will speak about the Russian and Belarusian perspectives of the Holocaust. Attacked by Hitler, this perspective on the Second World War can or is between an experience of victim and historical triumph. So the contribution is called Framed by the Great Patriotic War, ? Russian perspective on the Shoah.
Thank you for the introduction. Just to make a couple of things clear. First, my teaching affiliation is the Belarusian State University, while I do most of my research in the High School of Economics. And second, right now to focus, I'm going to speak solely about Russian perspectives. I think it's more interesting, especially because Belarus is, a relatively not such a contested issue, especially place. And today we've already had a number of reenactions of the ongoing culture wars. So I'm really looking forward to the reception of my presentation. But hopefully it's going to be very value-free, especially as it's rather late in the evening right now. And in my presentation, first I'm going to highlight just the main issues about their collective memory in the contemporary Russia, which is quite different in some ways from many cases we've discussed so far. And I'm going to formulate a specific question as a clash between what I saw in my data and what I had expected to come across in my data. It's really not at all the same. Then I'll show my empirical study, and I'll make a conclusion, not conclusions plural, one conclusion, and trace some more general and practical implications. Okay, to begin with, first of all, the collective memory in the contemporary Russia is very painfully and profusely debated in the public discourse. And I would say that, the key division lines, the key question posed to historical events are not quite the same as, for example, in Central and Eastern Europe, to mention their nearest region. Where, of course, historical events like elsewhere inevitably get marked as good or bad or ambivalent, something in between, and this ethical stance is very strong. But also, what's important is the contemporary Russia is struggling with its place in the imaginary competition between countries. So each event is evaluated as is it helping to move Russia forward, or on the contrary, was haunting it and turning it into a sort of a backward country. And this line, what is progress, is seen differently by different participants of this dialogue, but the idea of the competition is very widely shared. And also, there is a very strong tendency to divide history into the events that are meaningful, that can be somehow interpreted, and so no empty periods that do not matter, apparently. And also, what is very strongly present in the contemporary Russian public discourse on the Russian history and collective memory is the building of parallels. Those guys from, say, the 12th century, who are they now? There is a very pervasive tendency to project the events of however distant past into the present, because the present is contested too, and not to mention the future. And there is quite a large body of research on the Russian collective memory that shares the general idea that all is not well with the Russian collective memory, and they differ on what exactly is problematic about it. I believe everybody here has read Atkins' Robert Mourning, suggesting that Russians simply cannot mourn properly. So there are the undead, the unborn, and so on. But on the other hand, there is a feeling that not all is stated. There's so many things are hidden, and that's why I have recalled Danto's Ideal Chronicler, this idea that there is some finite pool of objective facts, and all these objective facts have to be brought to the surface, one way or another. There is quite a strong public demand for that, and on the other hand, Mikhail Suslov's study has shown that there is a quite clear official discourse on history that evaluates events as either good or bad, depending on whether they approve first property and second empire. And all the events are evaluated based on this, rather simple frame. And the justification of that, what stands behind this in the mass consciousness, is that in Russia there is a very, very strong and very stable demand for the greatness of the country. It's really amazing that for at least the last 15 years, the most desirable trait in the potential president, according to opinion polls, was the president's ability to make Russia, to save Russia's position as a great country. And what is understood by the great country really is not a matter, but the fact that this was the most widespread position surely explains a lot of stuff. So such is the background. And focusing on the place of Jews. It's here again is not so simple. On the one hand, the Jewish history in Russia is not that long as in other parts of Europe, and the so-called Jewish issue, in many ways, especially in the discourse of the elites, is the issue of anti-Semitism of all kinds as a marker of a very low-educated, backward nationalist. In Russia, it's a very widespread idea and people who express strong anti-Semitism are the marginals. They are at once designated as people of substandard education, and also the Jewish issue is largely formed as a part of the Europe-Russia relations, exactly as a global transnational issue, and that Russia has to position itself somehow. And also some minor things, but there's besides the point, and there is this Jewish autonomous regional oblast that I've studied quite deeply, and that figures not at all prominently in the Russian media, hardly ever members. And there is this museum here, some photos, and the full name is the Jewish Museum and Tolerance Center. And the first was in the contemporary Russia's list, especially in the discourse of the elites, the Jewish issue should not be the one that is repressed. But when we turn to, well, the only representation of the public history that is well, available to every person, because people in Russia read, well, very different newspapers, they watch and do not watch very different TV programs based on their political preferences, but they all go to school and they all study Russian history. It's mandatory. And when we turn to textbooks, there are obviously huge chapters dedicated to the World War II, and especially in Russian history, the Great Patriotic War. But, and each textbook mentions Jews, well, the fact that Jews were, well, specific, special targets of the Nazi extermination. But they are mentioned, not elaborated in any way. The question is why? And that was the central question of my study of this representation in the Russian history textbooks. And on one hand, yeah, that's not quite logical, because treatment of Jews by the Nazis is definitely not something Russian, the contemporary Russian government, has to be ashamed of. In fact, quite the contrary is true, because the Second World War is probably the only event that is not contested. Well, if we do not consider Stalin's rule, which is quite, well, a divisive issue in the contemporary Russia, but the idea that the people suffered enormously and defeated the enemy, this is shared by, well, almost by everybody, even by people holding very different political views. So if the enemy is, well, perceived as absolute evil, obviously if we show that the enemy committed atrocities, to show that the enemy wanted to exterminate the whole ancient people, such as Jews. Obviously, if we show that the enemy was so bad, then our victory is even more valuable, and shows indirectly, but well, not so indirectly, that we are good. So why? Why is it not elaborated? Okay, the first idea was that although elites in the contemporary Russia are in the vast majority not anti-Semitic, well, the everyday anti-Semitism is there, obviously, and there was this wish to, well, not to raise the contested issue. But, you know, Jews are mentioned, and in much more details, in different contexts. Jewish pogroms are described in many textbooks in detail, with photos, with elaboration that these pogroms were, well, condoned, if not organized by, well, some officials, that there existed certain parties, Black Hundred, and so on. And of course, pogroms are condemned, no question. And even despite the fact that the attitude towards Stalin is not that unambiguous in the contemporary Russia, the doctor's plot is elaborated in quite some detail. But in the majority of textbooks, not the Holocaust, which is clearly, well, not falling into this logic of self-aggrandizement, because Jewish pogroms and doctor's plots are the things the Russian society and Russian government can be ashamed of, unlike the Holocaust. But they are elaborated upon, and the Holocaust is not. The question is why? And to address this question, I decided to focus on the two polar cases. The two are textbooks that are different in the general intention and in quite a number of ways. The first textbook is you see the History of Russia, edited by Danilov and Philippov. Several years ago in Russia, there was a huge debate about the need of the unified secondary and high school textbooks on the Russian history. And they never came to unifying. Schools use different textbooks, but there was one textbook that was published in much more copies than all the others. And as such, it was not unofficially endorsed and recommended. So it came as close as possible to this unified history textbook. And this is the one. And the editors are high-ranking academics, although one of them got involved in a major scandal with plagiarized dissertation. And as you can see from the cover, the cover is very official. Very little detail, the flag of Russia and so on. And the opposite case is the textbook that, as far as I know, has not yet been out of print. It exists as an electronic textbook. It's a part of an independent, non-governmental, at least, project called Your History. And it was written by quite a well-known historian. He's a school teacher, history of a school teacher himself, by the way. And he's, a public figure and belongs to, Russian liberals in, the continental meaning of the word. And it is quite different. So I decided that comparing these two very different cases would show why this whole theme of the Holocaust is very scarcely covered in the massive textbooks. This official textbook, obviously, it has a very long and detailed chapter on the Great Patriotic War. And this chapter is subdivided into three parts, and the parts go as follow, and they go as follow in order of their size, and I would say in the order of decreasing significance of the issues. First, there is a very detailed and very dramatic narration of the military campaign itself. Then there is a narrative of their industry working for the front to help the army, the people united for the common goal, this sort of stuff. And only then there is the smallest part of all dedicated to the experience of the population under the Nazi occupation. And that is how Jews are mentioned. This is the only part of the text where the Nazi extermination of Jews is mentioned at all. And this is the only part of the whole chapter on the Great Patriotic War in this textbook where Jews are at all mentioned. You see the figure with other groups of victims, and the word Holocaust is never mentioned at all. And on the other hand, this alternative textbook, it is organized chronologically, and different issues have roughly the same coverage in terms of size, and it has the whole chapter dedicated to the Holocaust and its details. And I would say it reproduces the shared European narrative of the Holocaust. And by the way, this is, although as I said, all textbooks, well, all the over 10 textbooks I studied, all the textbooks mention the Nazi extermination of Jews, but this is the only textbook that mentions the word Holocaust. All the others simply don't. And these differences are quite strong, and there is an interesting similarity that in both textbooks, as different as they are, there is a chapter on collaboration with Nazis that immediately follows the chapter on victims. So there is one similarity. They are not they do not come from different universes. And my conclusion is that the fact that the Holocaust is just, scarcely covered by the authors of most Russian history textbooks has, virtually nothing or very little to do with the Jewish issue per se. Rather, Jewish victims are not covered in details because the victims of the occupation are not covered in such detail, because unlike many discourses we've discussed today so far in Russia, the discourse on the Great Patriotic War is not primarily the discourse on victimhood, it's the discourse of victory at any price. There is a very popular Russian song saying that we need the victory regardless of the price. And by the way, this quote is an epigraph to Katzer's textbook, which is quite telling. And what does this imply? I really wonder what the Russian narrative of the Shoah would have looked like. And I think that Katzer's reproduction of the European narrative planted into the Russian textbook is it's logical, but I don't think it's something that fits well with the aspiration of the target audience. So Russians really need to reconsider what the Shoah means in the Russian history, and this goes through the differentiation between the Russian history proper and the history of the territories where of the Soviet Union, where the Shoah took place, which are not Russia, and this turns to the relations between Russia and Central and Eastern Europe, which is a nice and inspiring issue. I hope you understand my irony. And this is where I stop. Thank you for your attention.
So, are there any questions? Professor?
A short one. When I was working on the historiography of the French Revolution, I found out that Marxist historians, Russians too, only dedicated a very small part to the execution of Louis XVI, because it was not important, the fact that he was executed concerning the mixed class struggle and so on. So in that respect, I think that Marxism and Marxism-Leninism, as a matter of fact, didn't have a good theoretical framework to explain the Holocaust. They had a good framework to explain fascism, a good framework even to explain Nazism, but not to explain the Holocaust. So in that respect, I can understand why they couldn't, because they were not able to explain it, why they put it out. I'm not justifying anything, just understand it. But why today? It's not the question of a theoretical framework, why is it today not possible to talk about the extermination of the Jews as being the extermination of the Jews, and even call it, by God, Shoah or Holocaust?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right that the contemporary, the post-Soviet Russian textbooks are not written from the Marxist perspective. They say quite a few things about so-called great individuals. They say very little about class struggle, and it's quite interesting, something I've been thinking quite a lot about, how quickly this, scientific communist, historical materialism stuff disappears from the mindset of the contemporary Russian historians, not only those who were dissidents, or virtually all of them. And I wouldn't say it's impossible to talk about it. One context in which the issue appears in the Russian public discourse is when people who oppose pro-Westerners and who resent Russia being compared to West in not unfavorable towards Russia. And that's what they say. Okay, you say Europe is our ideal, Europe is good and nice. Then why did they exterminate Jews? That's one issue. Obviously, there are some other contexts, but the thing is that it is not suppressed. It is in textbook. It is just not doesn't fit this whole idea of the Great Patriotic War as a heroic event. It's about heroism. It's not about victimhood. Not only Jewish victimhood.
My father was liberated by the Red Army. It was a very heroic thing to him that they came. So why not?
Perhaps an attempt to explain, because I regret that we have no data in the regarding to Great Britain, and I expect a similar effect in the Holocaust reception than in Russia. Why? My hypothesis is that the reason for framing this Holocaust in Russia with a great patriotic war is to stabilize national identity. The narrative has a function for national identity, and this is not a post-heroic society, this is a heroic society, Russia, and they use this narrative to make the own power greater, and this is the point, the crucial point, to say we are all Russians, we are strong people. And if you go to Great Britain, and I were there 4 weeks ago, and I was in the War Museum in London, it's very interesting to see. Some are very focused on, for example, the Holocaust is well represented, and in the level, in the highest level, they have a little bit hidden a department with the heroic examples of their own British history. If you make holiday in Great Britain in the summer, you can see all the time spectacular. You know this. This is my students who will study this in a specific sense, and this is the red arrows. This is a plane show, yeah, and it simulates the situation of the Second World War, and the message is all the time the same. We are able to defend our country. We are a society who want to be strong, and the others who are not the victors in the Second World War have only the possibility, like Hungary, for example, and also Germany, to use the resource to be a victim. This is in Germany this is a specific case, but this is the aspect I see in a political sense what we discussed in the contribution before.
When Britain never confronted its colonial past. So
this is part, it has a big tradition in this context, but you see, we have to get. Thank you. Yeah.
And I also want to say, I think that there is a bit of a difference, because I would say it's more legit for the Russians to say we enslaved or we fought slavery and we freed Europe, But for example, the Great Britons, we know they were winners, but they had not the best scores or stats in the war, I would say. So
Okay.
I would say it's
And they lost the
because
empire, you don't forget.
Sorry?
And they lost the empire, you have not to forget.
Yeah, of course, but even more
The same
than,
with Turkey.
but even more than it would be more legit for the Russians to say. This was always my question: why we fought for humanity? It must be a good asset for a nation, I would say, right?
But the aim wasn't the fight for
Yeah,
humanity. The aim was
It's manipulated.
the aim was us Russian against the Western American, the European ideology. Plus, just to add, we have the same issue in Turkey. To stabilize and to consolidate, I think it's consolidation of national identity and nationalism, which of course power and political power in the state is privileged to use this and instrumentalize. It's easier for them to instrumentalize those who identify themselves with the nation more than with for example, with the minorities. They are the minority. Actually, it's easy for them to instrumentalize them and use them, and therefore we have in Russia and in Turkey, for example, it's similar.
Maybe it's similar, but it's a different. It's an additive asset, I would say, because it's still the Russians who did it, but as an ad, you can say, okay, we did something heroic.
So I think we have to end
We talk about it
because you can talk at dinner. Thank you very much.